All right, so we can think of the role, just how much foreign policy is like centered in our government, and just how much of a role foreign policy plays when it comes to different positions of power, particularly the role of the executive, right? Just keep in mind that the president serves in all of the following roles. They are the chief executive, or that they're the head of state, they're the commander-in-chief, and the chief diplomat. And all these different entities where in the executive branch that are related to foreign policy. So we might consider the role of the National Security Council, or the State Department, the Defense Department, which is previously called the Department of War, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the intelligence community at large, right? Thinking like the role of the CIA, and the Department of Homeland Security. Right? These are all different spaces that would provide insight and have a certain perspective on things taking place outside of the U.S. Right. So just like we're thinking about the role of the executive in foreign policy, we can consider the role of Congress and foreign policy as well. Remember that Congress has foreign policy authority through the following areas. Right? They have they ratify treaties in the Senate, right? So if there's a treaty having to do with another nation, like that has to be ratified by the Senate. They confirm appointments, so people who are in different positions throughout government, particularly, including those having to do with looking outside of the United States, being involved in international affairs, those are confirmed, just like other appointments are confirmed within the Senate, right? They declare war. That takes place in Congress. They declare war, and I think highlighting this would be to show you here an example. Stop this, move this here. This is President Franklin D. Roosevelt declaring war on Japan. This is the full speech right here. It's not very long, right? But I think it makes sense for us to really think about how war is declared and actually bear witness to it. So that's an example here. Of course, I will add the link below. Please watch that. Congress also exercises spending power. Remember, Congress controls the purse, right? So that means spending power on all kinds of things, not just about, deciding whether or not to go to war, but like money to put behind it, right? Money to put into into the military. Does it stay the same? Does it go up? Does it go down, right? Making decisions about investing in weapons and so forth, right? These are decisions, right? This is spending power decisions that take place within the Congress. They oversee the executive branch in the ways that we know. We remember that there are checks and balances on the system, right? Whereas the Congress has a role in overseeing the executive branch. And they pass legislation, right? And the legislation that might have an effect on how we interact with other countries or entities. So both the Congress and the President have foreign policy power, which of course creates the possibility of conflict, right? We can highlight examples where the U.S. has gotten into wars that weren't, officially declared, or gotten themselves into conflicts, right? So we might go further to explore the War Powers Act. And it would highlight that declarations of war are actually increasingly uncommon. That's why watching the example that I highlighted for you of Franklin D. Roosevelt declaring war on Japan is so important, because it is increasingly uncommon to have that take place. Okay, we should explore the War Powers Act, which attempted to limit presidential authority in this area, right? So it wasn't just the president saying, I'm going to go to war with X, Y, or Z nation, that you would have the insight of Congress behind that. So as a way to respond to that, or so that the president is not on their own deciding about what conflicts to get involved in, is that the president must notify Congress if troops are moved into hostilities or where hostilities are imminent. That those troops can only stay for 60 days unless Congress passes specific authorization. And it's meant to stop endless wars, right? Like 20 years we were just in Afghanistan, right? So it's meant to have a limit on having wars that go on and on and on. Okay, and it should be noted that it's widely ignored. So what I'd like for you to check out here is this older news clip on the history of the War Powers Act. Let me see if I can highlight the title for you right here. It's only 2.5 minutes. Please check this out. And this here, which I think is really illuminating. How many wars is America fighting? It's more than you think. Okay. So I think really getting a sense of that is invaluable, right? There's the wars you can think of, and there are all these other conflicts the U.S. has been involved in that weren't officially wars, and yet the U.S. was there, right? Or is there. Okay. Please check this out. Okay. All right. So the American style of foreign policy has this kind of, or at least discussed as it's trying to be presented as aligned or in line with the values of the nation, right? Like pursuing moral values, like human rights, right? There was all of this talk, for example, with the U.S. and Afghanistan. I don't know who would remember this. And I guess there were some clips on this as the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan. But there were all of these stories about, true stories, right, about the ways in which girls were limited in the country because they were born girls, right, in terms of access to education, work, free movement of space, right? And it was discussed as like, wow, we're going to support girls in Afghanistan, right? So at least part of the conversation, public conversation about why it was good to be there, presented as such, right? The pursuit of human rights. Okay. I think to highlight this, when we talk about human rights, I've got a clip for us here on what are the universal human rights, right? I mean, human rights is a concept that is often discussed, but what are they? What are they really? So please check this out on what are human rights. Okay. And it's about balancing interest, right? Defending our security as a nation, promoting our economy, and spreading democracy, right? That's also been an argument for U.S. intervention in places, is that the U.S. would help to spread democracy in places that were more authoritarian through their intervention. I think it brings up other important questions, like can democracy be spread through military intervention, and probably a lot of other questions that come to your mind right now. Okay. The clips that I wanted to share with you here, and this one is jarring, but I would really highly recommend that you watch it, which is about Abu Ghraib, right? Abu Ghraib's Guantanamo in Cuba, and this highlights the ways in which the U.S. military literally tortured people who were imprisoned at Abu Ghraib. Literal torture. And so you have things like this come out, and you have to juxtapose them with spreading of democracy or human rights, when we also see direct human rights violations as an example of Abu Ghraib. Okay. And then, let's see, promoting our economy and spreading democracy, right? When you want to spread democracy as a country, that there's somehow some sort of benefits in it, and having other nations have a similar political system. But we also have to juxtapose that. That means compare it alongside to other U.S. actions, right? Like this one. This is a PBS news clip I asked you to please watch. Okay. Pentagon admits error in U.S. drone strike that killed 10 civilians in Afghanistan. Right? So 10 people were killed by a U.S. drone. And actually, many more have actually lost their lives to U.S. drones. It's the rare example where the U.S. takes credit for something having gone wrong. But there are so many examples of U.S. drones killing people, decimating wedding parties, killing multiple generations of folks. All you have to do is Google it, right? That information is available for you. But I'd like for you to start with this here, right? And think about that as it lines up with this balancing interest of things like promoting our economy, spreading democracy, defending our security, and ask yourself, does the U.S. become safer after examples of Abu Ghraib? Does that make the U.S. safer, right? Does the U.S. become safer after those drone strikes, right? And I'm sure other questions come up. I think it's really important that you ask them.